that is, but testing, well, I guess I'll hold my mic, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, we can hold. Good afternoon, everyone. We are in conversation this afternoon with Anna Badkhen, Kalfus Malaka Gharib. My name is April Alvarez. I am the Associate Director of the MFA program at SWANY, the University of the South. And also, I serve on the board of Humanities Tennessee. So thank you for coming out this afternoon, and thank you for your support of the festival. And in fact, if you'd like to support us additionally, we're on Venmo, so I thought I would mention that. One note, at the end, we'll take a few questions from the audience, but then we'll go over to the plaza for a book signing. So I encourage you to go over to the plaza with us and purchase books and continue any conversations there. So today we're lucky to be with this amazing group of writers, and I want to start by telling you a little bit about them.
Actually, before you do, April, could folks in the projection booth dim the lights somehow? They're really right in our eyes. Is anybody there?
Oh.
No. Somebody's going up? Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, you guys are right in it right there, yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe we can cut that out for a second, and then when we get to Malaka's projection, we can do that.
Oh, you need that for the thing in the back. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, just for a minute. So we'll get started.
Gotcha. Nope, here we go again. I swear I didn't do it. I swear I didn't do it. No.
So, Ken Kalfus, once he recovers from the bright lights, I would like to tell you that he is the author of 3 previous novels, including A Disorder Peculiar to the Country, which was a finalist for the 2006 National Book Award. He has also published 3 collections of stories. He has received a Pew Fellowship and a Guggenheim. His story, PU 239, was adapted for film on HBO, and I highly recommend the book and the watching on HBO. His current book is 2 a.m. in Little America. It is a novel that imagines a near future in which sweeping civil conflict has forced America's young people to flee its borders into an unwelcoming world. Anna Badkhen is a writer and essayist who has covered a dozen wars on 3 continents. She is the author of 6 previous books of nonfiction. She has received a Guggenheim, a Barry Lopez Visiting Writer Fellowship, and a Joel Selden Award for writing about civilians in war zones. She clearly has the heart of a journalist. Her essay collection, Bright Unbearable Reality, is about migration, displacement, and the hope for connection in a time of emotional and geopolitical disruption. Malaka Gharib is a writer, journalist, and cartoonist. She is the author of I Was Their American Dream, a graphic memoir, winner of an Arab American Book Award. She works as a digital editor at NPR. Her comics, zines, and writing have been published in numerous places, including The New Yorker. Her newest graphic memoir is It Won't Always Be Like This. And I won't give away the whole plot, but a lot of it centers on her parents' divorce. Malaka's been living in America, but as part of her mother's Filipino family and community, visits her father's new family in Cairo. So I'm gonna ask each author to tell us a little bit more about their books and to also read for just a minute or two. One of the things that was most striking to me about this group of writers is that they were covering some similar themes, but they are coming at it in 3 very different ways. So who would like to start this afternoon? Ken, you're in the middle.
Yeah, okay, that's fine, yeah. Hi, everybody. Well, thanks for having us here. It's been a pleasure being in Nashville. I was saying right before I came here that I was in Nashville last time, 5 years ago, for the solar eclipse. And I wish you had organized another one for this weekend, but it's okay, I understand. It was terrific. So my new novel is set, as April mentioned, a little bit of time in some speculative future where things have gone even worse here than they might be considered now, where civil unrest has forced a lot of Americans to leave the country, young Americans, because of reasons of not enough jobs or not wanting to fight in a war. So my main character has been in one country. He had to leave. it's not easy to get past. I mean, American passport doesn't give you the kind of privilege it might have now. You can't travel anywhere. A lot of countries don't really tolerate Americans or don't really care much about Americans. We're no longer the center of civilization as we think it is now. Anyway, I'm going to read the first few paragraphs of a section in the middle of the book to give you an idea of what my reading voice sounds like.
Hey, Ken, would you mind pulling your mic up so we
my
can get
mic?
a little, yeah,
Yeah,
that'd be great.
okay.
Just pull it straight out. That's already set for you.
Sorry about that. We had a conversation with the mic before we started talking, and then I forgot about it. In my next country of residence, no one believed I was a tourist. Not at the airport when I arrived, nor when I looked for places to live and work. It was hard to find work, and then once I did, in a food processing plant, I overstayed my visa until I couldn't any longer. Further crackdowns were coming. I went to another country, and then another after that, each move a last-minute escape from a looming migrant center or prison. One desert border was crossed on foot with about a dozen other undocumented travelers of diverse origins, led by smugglers who did not know the way as well as advertised. The noonday frigidity broke records, yet in its lack of relief, its desolation, its stillness, and its boundless, cloudless, birdless sky, the desert was a place of strange and absolute beauty. Every one of the desperate migrants was aware of this beauty, this gorgeousness, this transcendence, this manifestation of perfect harmony, as if it were a discrete, substantial item. Its appreciation, the full purpose of human existence, even as we suffered for it. We continued on, watching our steps. Night fell, the cold like a blade slicing through every inch of our exposed skin, and a family with an elderly parent had we left behind, still drinking in the beauty. For 10 months or so, I belonged to a crew on a container ship, flying a flag of convenience. My passport wouldn't allow me ashore in most ports. The borderless, visa-free ocean was my home. The American catastrophe had meanwhile entered a new phase that drained the world of any cruel pleasure it had taken in our downfall. Now the overwhelming sentiment was pity. I followed the news with averted eyes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Anna, would you like to go next?
Hi, I'm Anna. Bright Unbearable Reality is how the poet Alice Oswald translates the word energia from the Greek in her interpretation of the Iliad. It is, she says, a state when gods come to earth not in disguise but as themselves. Bright Unbearable Reality is the title I chose for my collection of essays that address the current state of our humanity, which I think is dire, and which requires, I think, some addressing head-on and not in disguise. A single person is missing for you, and the whole world is empty, writes Philippe Ariès. And each moment, at least one person is missing for millions of us, often out of reach, flung apart as we are, undone transcontinentally. The grief makes it impossible to move. This is aporia, an absence of path, a passagelessness that engenders a state of powerless, immobilized confusion, of being at a loss, and no way that is not the same as a presence, a separation of heart and will. Yet there is something else, the connections that may fade but never disappear. The gossamer threads of intimacy we float behind us as we disperse. The kinship that may be undone in time, but that our memories sustain as vivid, iridescent as a painted bunting's plumage. Picture the brief animation anthropologists sometimes use to demonstrate human impact on the planet. A pale, luminescent tapestry of roads, railways, pipelines, cables, air routes, and shipping lanes latticing a nighttime Earth, except instead of physical infrastructure, imagine the other ways in which the Anthropocene connects us, the polythreaded, shimmering veil of yearning and missing and care and love.
So beautiful, thank you. And Malaka, would you like to tell us about your book? And I think you, as a graphic memoirist, have some visuals for us,
Yes.
which I'm excited about.
I have some visuals. But I'll tell you a little bit about what the book is about while they're getting the visuals up. But It Won't Always Be Like This is a second memoir that I've written. It's a graphic memoir. It's a comic. And it's about my childhood summers in the Middle East. I arrived one summer to find out that my dad has remarried. And so the next 15 years of my life is trying to figure out how I fit into my dad's new life and my dad's, and have a relationship with my dad's stepmom, while at the same time trying to figure out how to be a woman in this space, in this part of the world that I didn't know anything about. Even though I am Egyptian American, Filipino Egyptian American, doesn't make me Egyptian, and it doesn't make me Middle Eastern. And I learned that the hard way many times throughout my summers in the Middle East, until one day I actually became, I guess, accepted for myself that I had become Arab. So I'll go ahead and read you the prologue of the book. The Rock. Ugh, how lame. Why couldn't they have gotten me a Polly Pocket or a Beanie Baby or something? Okay. I didn't get much notice from my dad that I had a new stepmom. Listen, I have something to tell you. What? Why are you only telling me this now? I met her at age 9 in my grandmother's garden in Cairo. Hello, ya Malaka. My name is Hala. Hi. I mean, assalamu alaikum. I told Hala all about you. Hala spoke very little English. And despite visiting Egypt every summer from my home in Los Angeles, I spoke very little Arabic. She's telling you she's excited to spend the summer with you. Sure, me too. Hala has something for you. It's a stone. We made it for you. It has your name, my name, and your dad's. We drew on it with ballpoint pen. Isn't that neat? Yes. Merci, ya Hala. My first impression of Hala was that she was very pretty. She was 26, had auburn hair, tan skin, and hazel eyes. Like my mom, she was put together. But unlike Mom, she seemed way more fun and playful. Come on, let's get some mango. Woo, my favorite. Observing her in the garden that night, Allah, I wondered, what would become of me and Dad now that Hala was in the picture? Okay, let me smell it now. I would spend several summers trying to figure that out until I realized the real question wasn't how I fit into their lives, but it was how they fit into mine. Thank you.
Thank you for that. It's just such a delightful book. I have so many questions for all of you this afternoon, so I'm very excited to talk with you. But let's talk about a basic thread running through all of these works. All of you have centered a kind of displacement, sometimes a disconnection, or at least a yearning for connection, whether it's for immigrants, refugees, indigenous people, or first-generation Americans. So talk to me about why this was so important to you to make a commitment, to create a whole book. So, Anna, you're right here. I can start with you, or Malaka.
In my case, I guess because of my work, that has focused on different parts of the world, it was probably more natural for me to look at the world as a whole, and the contemporary world in which 1 in 7 people is somehow displaced, sometimes on our own will, sometimes against our will. So I wanted to, when I write, for me, writing is learning and trying to understand something. So I was trying to understand how and if we can contend with one another in this world where so many of us are living someplace not where we were born. And for those of us who are living where we were born, we are encountering people who have come from elsewhere. So I was trying to kind of prize out how can we survive as humans on a planet that is so dispersed.
That's lovely. Malaka, I think you have a deeply personal connection to that idea, maybe not directly through some of the things that Anna talks about with a refugee situation, but coming in and thinking about being a global citizen in some ways.
Yeah, so my first book really focused on the feeling of displacement or like lack of belonging in the American context as the daughter of immigrants. But this second book is more about, it's almost about feeling displaced within the family context. It's feeling a lack of belonging in a blended family. But I think what's interesting about this particular family, in my family, is that it was a family, a feeling of displacement of family life in the Arab world, in an Arab family with Arab rules and in an Arab society. And I had to sort of accustom myself to the norms that I didn't understand because I had grown up in America, where I had also doubly felt a lack of belonging there. But feeling a connection to my Arab side was even more foreign to me. There's also these elements with my father who had ended up in Egypt because he could not achieve the American dream here in the States. So his bigger dream was to achieve the Khaliji dream, the dream of making it in the Gulf. So there is almost like a sense of leaving, like being part of his journey to find a better version of our lives together in this space of the Middle East.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And
so I just want to respond to those,
yeah,
to both what both writers, what you both said means a lot to me. I mean, on the issue of global displacement, as Anna said, it's a fact of 21st century life that, well, you said 1 out of 7 people have been displaced. Not quite as many have been forced to be displaced, but still a great number of people have lost their homes, and not always in comfortable situations. And that, you know, I think it's hard not to respond to that if you're looking at the world the way it is. And Malaka's story of feeling personal displacement, so that's something I've never felt that way. I've already spent a fair amount of time living abroad, but always as an American with an American passport, with all the American things that within range for me. I wanted to imagine what it might be not to have that privilege of feeling at home in the world. And there's no reason that this privilege we have, this privilege of feeling at home in the world, is eternal either. So I wanted, so both those ideas, the idea of this global phenomenon and the feeling of other people's personal displacement, not my own, fed into my novel.
I just want to add to that because I think that's really interesting about how an American passport makes you feel like you're at home in the world. I almost felt growing up in the Arab world that my American passport, I had no social, because everybody else didn't, the world in the Arab world revolves around Cairo, right? And the West feels like a very, very far away place. So anytime I tried to insert my ideas of what it meant to be a cool American, or, you know, I live by Disneyland, or, you know, I listen to all these American bands, there was no, that didn't have any social capital. So amongst my peers, at least.
Well,
so
I think that's actually the truth. That's close to the truth of the world for Americans. It does, and particularly if you're older. It's not just the American passport. It's the American culture, the American shops. If you're not a younger, if you're an older person particularly, you can build a little America around you. It's that kind of privilege. It's a bit of an illusion to think that's true for everybody. For you as a teenager, when you're there as a teenager, yes, it's gonna.
Kids are cruel.
It's gonna be different. Yeah.
That was a fantastic question. There were two things that I kept coming back to in your work, and we can talk about for all of you. Again, this idea of a common thread. But one of them, when we're looking at displacement or disconnection or this yearning to connect, that sometimes the opposite of that is a kind of confusion and a kind of erasure. And Anna, you said, there was a beautiful quote in one of your essays, "Our past by and large is a poem of erasure." And Ken, I'm not gonna give away too much because this is such a compelling book. I mean, I felt like I was in many ways reading a thriller, but your protagonist is in this state of confusion that he also recognizes as a state of confusion, and I found that so interesting. And Malaka, your character's not confused, but she has to keep track of so many different things to keep from being confused, and to think about how she's going to fit in. So I would just love to hear you all talk about that.
Well, I do think that actually life today is confusing. There's so much stimuli.
Agreed.
There's so many devices. Our devices have made us more narcissistic, which makes it harder for us to understand what other people are how they're living, how they're responding. Obviously, if you're displaced from your home, the world will be more disorienting. As I just said, for Americans, we can always, particularly American adults, we can recreate our home elsewhere, perhaps. But I think disorientation is one of the basic premises of contemporary life, which is a great thing for novelists because you can do a lot with that, you know.
As you did.
I'm too disoriented and I need to check my devices.
You check mine if you want to see the ball game.
So I didn't write a book of answers. I wrote a book of questions because I am trying to orient myself in this world as well. I also am a migrant. I moved to this country when I was 28 years old. It was a move of convenience. I'm an economic migrant and a very privileged one. There are so many layers of enforced disorientation, like the belief that American passport carries currency, like the belief that if we check our devices frequently enough, we will somehow have knowledge that will somehow give us control, like if we have knowledge, we're somehow protected from calamity. Like it can't happen to me. These are all very disorienting layers of contemporary existence. I also find it very disorienting how, in addition to misplacing or displacing our bodies, we also are displacing our compassion in all of this. How we choose to decide that compassion is somehow limited, that it is a limited resource, that love is somehow a limited resource. That is extremely disorienting, and I think we're basically, in my opinion, in a brightly unbearable state of urgently needing a new language of to orient ourselves around, a new language for vulnerability and shame and fear, so that we can look at all of this directly in the face and see if we're naked before it, if we dismantle all these layers of disorientation, what can we actually salvage? Sorry to
Love
be
that.
done.
I think when I started writing this book, the main question, very much like you, Anna, where it's like writing is about discovery. You don't know what you're going to write until you write it. Writing is a journey. We all know that. But I wanted to find out how living in the Arab world and spending time there, spending 20 summers in a row there, like how did that affect my worldview? And I had a lot of conflicting and confusing worldviews. One is the one of American exceptionalism, where I thought I was really like the woman on top because I had this amazing passport. And my dad, he would brag to everyone that I was an American citizen, that he had given birth to a child who had American citizenship. So there was that. But then there was also the idea of what the proper Arab Muslim woman should portray themselves, how they should carry themselves in the world. And for my dad, that was to be this word that I hate. It's tayyiba, which means to be nice, like a nice woman, a woman who doesn't wear too much makeup and doesn't show her boobs or her butt. And, she is, what is she? She is just well-spoken and polite and blah, blah, blah. But I was totally into punk music at the time, so I was a skateboarder, I wore black, it was a very lame concept. And I tried to explain to my dad many times that I was into subculture, but he just didn't seem to understand that. And then there's also that too, this confusion of I had these American notions of what a parent should be, right? So I grew up watching Full House and Seventh Heaven, and I thought that dad is supposed to be chummy with me and hanging out, and Arab dads are not really quite that way. And at the same time, I could never figure out what my relationship to Cairo was. I didn't know, I didn't feel like I was Egyptian when I hung out with Egyptian people, which is a very common feeling for people who are third culture kids. And I could never crack the culture. I would always say things that were wrong, or I would put my foot in my mouth, or just really embarrassing things that you can't even imagine that I would do. For example, oh, I love your top, and then she'd be like, well, do you want it? And I'd be like, no. And she's like, well, you didn't say mashallah, so it seems like you want my top. And I'm like, no, I don't want your top, Jesus, I don't want it. You know what I mean? So just putting my foot in my mouth all the time, and so it was kind of confusing to navigate that too. So I think that in sum, it's just confusing worldviews, and you have to carry that all within yourself. You have to, at the end of the book and through the process of writing the book, I came to a place that it's okay to be totally confused and just carry that all in you.
I love it. I love it, and thank you for making us laugh a little bit with you. I have so many questions, and I want to get to some audience questions too, but one of them was something I was thinking about more recently today, in a conversation I watched earlier today with Joshua Cohen, he talked about how the immigrant experience, of course, changes the person who immigrates, but how also the immigration experience changes that place to which this person has come to. And I'm wondering if that strikes a note with any of you. I think of it almost as, even if we're talking about particular communities, but even for that person, it's almost as if they might be in sort of an ecotone space. So whether it's from displacement or from, you know, in your case, visiting your father every summer, that you find yourself in this in-between space, or that the people that you've been writing about. So Ken, do you want to?
Yeah, I was at the Joshua Cohen thing. It was excellent. I would say what he was talking about, I mean, that larger point is correct. Obviously, and we know this in our own country, our own history, immigrants have made our country, and not only America, other countries too. They've you know, immigrants have always, migration is a worldwide phenomenon, and it's always changing the country. He was, actually, interesting thing, he was talking about Jewish Americans in the 60s writing sitcoms, television sitcoms, which were all coded for, the sitcoms did not involve Jewish characters, but they all were in Jewish situations, including tenement situations, the immigrant situation. It was a very interesting point of view. But we could look around and see how, you know, Arab Americans have changed, or Asian Americans, and you know, I mean, so yes, I mean, I think it's one of the great things about immigration is that when things are working well, it does change us in a richer countries. Yeah.
I'd like to say that it's interesting because, like, I am not an immigrant. I think a lot about that. My parents were immigrants, and I have no ties to American history. When I was a fifth grader and reading a textbook about America or whatever, you know, like the state of California. I grew up in California, so we learned about California in fifth grade. Had no connection to this. My great-grandfather was a fisherman on an island in the Philippines and lived hand to mouth. And my other great-grandfather probably, I think he worked on the Suez Canal or something, you know? Like, I have no history to this place. And the immigrant story, the typical immigrant story of like them coming to America to make a new life, that is not my story either. What is my story is trying to be this second-generation person, trying to, you know, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like I no longer have to worry about the basics. My parents fought for that. Now I have bigger worries, which is about belonging and feeling like I have a stake in this place. And so, for me, I think what shapes me and shapes the books that I write is understanding what it means to be an American, like to come to the conclusion that the sentence "I am an American" is an authentic sentence for me to believe, not just because I have a passport or because I have, you know, my parents had decided to move here. That to really feel like I can believe those words. And just I would say that you know, the fact I grew up in a mostly Asian community in Southern California where there were no white people. I thought they were mythological creatures on television. You know, you know, they were in magazines and books, but they weren't in my day-to-day life. And that is my America, with many second-generation Americans. So, yes, that's how I feel about that.
Yeah, I have actually a lot of reactions to the idea that, I mean, immigrants didn't build this country, Black people built this country. So once we get that out of the way, let's talk about this country. There's there's a myth of immigrant America, which is a myth of white immigrant America, European immigrant America, especially, you know, from white America from particular countries. What immigrant America is today, since we're talking about this country, the United States, what strikes me when I think about ectones and how migrants change geographies where we enter, is that the same community that talks about this being a country of immigrants is woefully unprepared to imagine the kind of baggage a lot of people bring here. This idea that this is the land of milk and honey, which exists in many countries of the world, and that is definitely maintained here, and you're so lucky to be here. Aren't you lucky to be here? It erases the trauma that so many people bring with them, the trauma that is the cause for them leaving their places. And so here you have, you know, thousands of people coming right now from Ukraine, from Syria, from Afghanistan, from Iraq, from Somalia, all of whom have witnessed the absolute worst. And they're supposed to be so lucky to be here. And they're supposed to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and enter this wonderful American society and be so happy that they made it. Nobody's taking into account what their nightmares are. Nobody's taking into account how our neighbors are suffering and what they left behind. It's all in the past. So I'm really confused about how we're going to move forward as a country if we don't acknowledge the enormous mental health problem of people who are coming here. People who are sending their children alone from Venezuela? Come on. Like people who are swimming across the Rio Grande? People who are going into lorries, who are being raped so that they can come here? Yeah, ecosystem is the ecosystem of a country that is sort of accepting of people from other places who are carrying this kind of trauma. There's a lot of compassion that needs to happen, and I'm not sure that the language of we're a country of immigrants is going to cut it. Also, this is native country. It's a stolen country. So like all sorts of layers, right?
There's a lot of layers there to dig through, but I think one of the ways to do it is to write about it. And so the three of you have these amazing books for us to read and be part of. And I have one last question, and I'm going to get to all of you. But it's about language, because that's what you were just talking about a little bit, Anna. And in your essays especially, there are many times you take a deep dive with a particular word, and it helps pull us into a sense of place. And there are other times that, me, the white American, I'm not centered. You're using words about geography and space that are local language words. And I love the way you do that, but you clearly have a great love of language. How does language help us encounter these situations and think about them?
I don't know that it does. I don't know that it does help me, but I do know, kind of maybe in continuing the previous discussion. But so Ken is the author of some of my favorite books, And also, he's the author of a book with my favorite title, A Disorder Peculiar to the Country. I use it a lot. I use this phrase always with credit.
Thank you.
Almost every time I speak in public. Because there's language, right? There is a language that says, what exactly is wrong with our particular situation? What exactly needs to be fixed? I am not a native speaker of English. For me, language is a very, a tool I have to use very, very carefully because it's not my native tool. So in Russian there is this art. I don't think it has a name. If it does, I don't know it. But there is a traditional art of making very delicate objects, like a sculpture of a bird where almost every feather is its own kind of piece of wood, out of a whole piece of wood with an axe. So for me, writing is like precision chiseling with an axe. That's what I do.
Fair enough, fair enough. Do we have some questions in the audience? And I can repeat them. Just raise your hand high if you have a question. Question for Stephen Alvarez, I see you. Yeah, and let me repeat that question again. So how do you bring about a new language to help us increase, right, compassion, empathy, and I think even in Malaka's book, like a sense of belonging. That's what we all want.
Well, I think repeating this question twice in a room definitely helps build something. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, okay. I do think language is important, but language used to construct stories, and the stories we create as artists, the stories we tell each other as people, the stories we communicate as a society, those hopefully will build compassion, will build empathy. You know, we see each other in each other's stories. So finding a language to tell the right stories, as I think three of us have tried to do in our own disparate ways, is a small part of that project.
I found that in my work, that in this new book, that the lack of language helped me realize how much compassion there is actually in so many other things, in so many other interactions with people. It's possible to create a really powerful connection with somebody, a stranger from another culture, with nothing at all. Body language, with hand motions, with games, with singing, dancing. There are so many ways to make a human connection with somebody, and I didn't understand the power of that until I went back and wrote this book, and I saw that most of the book is about me and my stepmom. My stepmom doesn't speak English, and I don't speak very much Arabic, and yet we were able to create this unbreakable bond between each other with nothing. I don't know what we did to pass the time, but I let that be a lesson for. In some way, it was like, I think writing this book was. I wrote it with an awareness of the way that the West perceives the Arab world, and there's some wonderful and obvious metaphor in there for that.
But also, if you read, when you read these two books, you will see, for example, Malaka's book. Sure, as she described to you today, it's about a very specific person and very specific situations that probably none of us, or I don't know who is in the audience, but not everybody can relate to theoretically. But I was like, yeah, I was reading this book, I'm like, yeah, I was that kid who was like not cool, and all the girls were into boys, and I thought boys were and you know, I was wearing the wrong clothes, and I was made fun of, and then suddenly I became a woman, and suddenly I had to navigate the, you know, the adolescence, and I mean, I think any girl, I think, you know, it's very specifically you, but it's also any girl, and I think any teenager is trying to figure out their relationship with their families, where they're adopted families, real families, step families, birth families. You know, those are universal values. Or in Ken's book, the beautiful description about how we form cliques and how we maintain these cliques, even if we're in a situation that we're unfamiliar with, we still bond together into these little diasporic nests, and the universality of human suspicion and the universality of mistrust. I mean, that's what literature does, and literature does it with words. So, you know, these two books do it marvelously. So I guess, I mean, here we are at a book festival. Read to build compassion.
Anyone else? All right, I'm going to close out with one thing. Memory. It's important to all of your work. And I'm looking at you, Malaka, because it's remembering what has happened over a series of time. So let's close out with that, and just think about how you use that, each of you in your work, having characters think back on things.
Yeah, so I wrote this book in collaboration with my stepmother and my dad, who don't speak to each other, and me. So I was like, you know, I acted like a journalist, and I basically like triangulated their facts between them. Like, well, Dad said that you like hated him for this reason. Is that true, Hala? And Hal will be like, I never said that. And they'll go back to Dad and be like, oh, Dad said that you didn't say that. So what do you think? So I'd have to do a lot of negotiation. But we were basically negotiating memory and the memory of family. And I was happy to do that, actually. I was happy to be back in that role because it helped jog a lot of memories for me. So actively putting myself back into stepdaughter-daughter situation between the two of them was just unlocked a lot of memories for me. Yeah.
And Ken, you have a character who slowly reveals things that have happened in the past.
So obviously we are a product of our memories. If you read the work of Philip K. Dick, you'll see there's possibly fiction with about false memories. We particularly people who are left their country. When you leave your country, I think for a lot of immigrants, you've also left all the things that you've had that you remembered as part of your life, and you forget the relations between people. One of the things that always impressed me in the work of Isaac Bashevis Singer, who is a Jewish writer from Eastern Europe who came to America in, I guess, early part of the 20th century. He came from a shtetl, someplace. He won the Nobel Prize writing in Yiddish, and he would always encounter people on Upper Broadway in New York, and say, hey, wait, aren't you from the shtetl, and aren't you from here? And all of a sudden memories would come back, but it would have to be but you would, I guess when you emigrate, you sort of lose contact with your memories, and that's one of the disorienting things we spoke about earlier.
I love, in neuroscience, one of the terms for false memories is superposition catastrophes.
Where's that from?
In neurology.
I love it.
One of the
I love it.
terms, yeah.
I love it. Superposition
You're welcome.
is a physics term. So that's great. That's great. Yeah.
Well, we're going to end it here. I would love to invite everyone over to the plaza. Parnassus Books, who's been a great partner to Humanities Tennessee, has books for sale. So if you didn't spend all your money Venmoing Humanities Tennessee to help support the festival, please, there are 3 books to buy, and our authors will be there in the signing tent to sign them. So thank you so much. And I want to thank you all. I want to thank you for sharing your writing, for committing to producing these amazing books, and for being here this afternoon. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having us, and thank you all.
Thank you.